August 2025. A summer evening in Nashville. The air was heavy, the kind of thick Tennessee heat that presses against the skin and makes tempers short. But it wasn't the weather that left this community shaken. It was the choices, the secrets, and the confrontation that would erupt in violence. At the center of it all was 42-year-old Keiona Wilson, a wife, a mother, and a woman determined to demand the truth. Her husband was hiding inside another woman's home, and Keiona wasn't about to leave without answers. This is not just a story about one fatal encounter. It is a story about betrayal, about a man who chose silence over honesty, about two women locked in a conflict that neither of them asked for but both of them fueled. What happens when the lies of one man place two lives on a collision course? And how does a community recover when private pain is laid bare in the most public, violent way imaginable? On that night, Keiona moved her husband's car from outside the home of 32-year-old Keosha Greer. It was an act both symbolic and desperate. She was reclaiming her place, her dignity, her right to the truth. But what began as confrontation escalated into terror. Keiona forced her way inside, demanding that Keosha face her, demanding that her husband stop hiding. Inside those walls, anger and fear clashed. A shot rang out through the storm door, and then another as the two women struggled inside. Even then, Keiona refused to collapse. Wounded and bleeding, she climbed into her car and drove off in search of help. She flagged down officers, gasping for breath, her body broken but her will unshaken. But within moments, her fight was over. The wife who came searching for truth would not return home, and a husband, once hidden in shadows, would now be forced to face the destruction left behind. In this episode, we will unravel the shocking story of Keiona Wilson, her husband, and his mistress, a confrontation that ended in bloodshed and heartbreak. We will piece together how an affair led to tragedy, why one woman chose violence, and how the cowardice of one man left two lives shattered forever. If you love detailed examinations of true crime cases, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss stories that reveal how fragile trust and loyalty can truly be. And remember, most people who skip subscribing usually end up forgetting the case details that could have changed how they see the world. Don't let that be you. Stay with me. This is the story of a love triangle in Nashville that ended in death, betrayal, and questions that still haunt those left behind. Before the bullets, before the storm door, before the police lights filled the streets of Nashville, there were lives lived in the quiet rhythm of routine. To understand what happened on that August evening in 2025, we must first know the people at the center of it. Because tragedies like these don't simply appear out of nowhere. They are born out of choices, of lies, of desires kept in shadows until they tear everything apart. At the heart of this story was Keiona Wilson. 42 years old, she was known to those around her as dependable, protective, and fiercely loyal to her family. Neighbors described her as someone who carried herself with dignity, a woman who had weathered storms in her life and still stood tall. She was a wife, a mother, and a woman who had invested years of herself into a marriage that she believed was worth fighting for. But beneath that strong exterior, cracks were forming. Cracks created not by her own doing, but by betrayal creeping silently into her marriage. The betrayal came in the form of another woman. Her name was Keosha Greer. At 32, she was younger, independent, and by all accounts, unafraid to stand her ground. Greer lived in Nashville, carving her own identity, but her name became forever linked to the Wilson family when she began an affair with Keiona's husband. What began in secrecy would grow into a bond that could not stay hidden for long. It wasn't just an affair, it was an intrusion, a violation of trust that transformed ordinary lives into something combustible. And then there was the husband, the man whose silence would become one of the most haunting aspects of this story. He was the common link between the two women, the one who sought comfort in two worlds, yet chose neither honesty nor responsibility. On that August night, he was hiding inside Keosha Greer's home as the storm unfolded outside. His silence was not passive, it was a decision, a choice to let two women carry the weight of his actions while he remained in the shadows. The setting was Nashville, Tennessee, a city alive with music, culture, and community spirit. But even in a place known for its energy, there are neighborhoods that feel small, where people notice the movements of cars, where arguments carry through open windows, where secrets rarely stay secret for long. It was in such a neighborhood that Keiona's determination would meet Keosha's defiance. Imagine the scene. The summer heat pressing down, the tension thick in the air long before the first words were exchanged. Keiona spots her husband's car parked outside Greer's house. In that moment, a decision forms. Not to drive away, not to wait until later, but to act. She climbs into the vehicle, moves it, claiming her presence, signaling her authority as a wife unwilling to be erased. That single act set everything into motion. Inside the house, Keosha Greer knew what was coming. She was not about to back down. She stood inside her doorway, firearm in hand, as the confrontation escalated. Keiona, driven by rage and heartbreak, forced her way in. The air inside was charged with fear, anger, and desperation. A shot was fired through the storm door. Another followed as the two women struggled, and in the middle of it all the husband remained hidden, the silent witness to the chaos he had created. But Keiona was not a woman who would collapse easily. Even as bullets tore into her body, she fought to stay alive. She managed to retreat, to climb back into her car, blood soaking through her clothes, determination burning through her pain. She drove, searching for help, her vision blurred, her body weakening. Somehow she found the strength to flag down police. In those final moments, she refused to disappear quietly. The officers who arrived saw not just a wounded woman, but the devastating result of betrayal. Keiona gasped for air, clinging to what little strength she had left. But it wasn't enough. Her body gave out, and with her final breath, the story shifted forever. The wife was gone. The mistress would soon face charges, and the husband, once again, remained silent. This was no random act of violence. It was the outcome of choices, of secrecy, of jealousy, and of rage. A collision of lives that might have been avoided had honesty come before deceit. In this story, one woman died, another pulled the trigger, and a man stood at the center, his cowardice echoing louder than any words he might have spoken. As we continue, we will step deeper into the investigation, the search for answers, and the questions that remain. Was this truly an act of self-defense? Or was it the tragic climax of a love triangle where nobody was ever going to walk away whole? The night of the crime was not just another evening in Nashville. It was a moment in time where years of betrayal, silence, and suspicion collided. What happened inside that small neighborhood home would echo far beyond its walls, leaving a wife dead, a mistress branded a killer, and a husband exposed for the lies he had long kept hidden. After moving her husband's car, Keiona Wilson stood at the doorway of Keosha Greer's home. Her voice was firm, her demand simple. She wanted answers. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted for years, was inside, too ashamed or too afraid to show his face. His silence added fuel to Keiona's fury. She pounded on the door, her heart racing, the weight of humiliation pressing down harder than the summer heat. Keosha Greer inside wasn't about to open the door and submit. She knew what Keiona wanted, and she knew the confrontation was unavoidable. But instead of facing it with words, she armed herself with a gun. From her perspective, Keiona wasn't just a wife demanding the truth. She was a threat, someone invading her space, someone who could expose everything. With each knock, with each shout, the tension inside the house built toward the breaking point. The moment Keiona forced her way in, the air changed. The sound of wood straining against hinges, the storm door rattling, it was the sound of confrontation becoming something far more dangerous. Keosha pulled the trigger. A shot ripped through the storm door, shattering glass, piercing the air with violence. But Keiona didn't stop. She pushed through, determined to confront the woman who had taken what was hers. Inside, the struggle was immediate and chaotic. Keiona, wounded but relentless, clashed with Keosha in close quarters. The two women fought, one clinging to rage and heartbreak, the other clinging to fear and survival. Another shot was fired. This time the bullet tore into Keiona, leaving her body broken, but not her will. Even in those moments, her determination refused to let her fall. Bloodied, gasping for breath, Keiona pulled herself back to her car. Every movement was agony, but she refused to collapse on the floor of her rival's home. She turned the ignition, her vision blurred, her strength fading. With sheer willpower, she pressed forward, navigating the streets of her neighborhood, desperate to find help. She spotted police officers nearby, flagged them down, and with her final ounces of strength, tried to speak. But her body was failing. Moments later, in front of the very people who could have saved her, she succumbed to her injuries. The wife who came demanding the truth was gone. The mistress who had pulled the trigger now faced the weight of her actions, and the husband, hidden in the shadows of the home, was left exposed, not by his words but by the silence that had cost his wife her life. This was the crime that stunned Nashville, not just for its brutality, but for the raw human failures that allowed it to happen. The investigation began almost immediately after Keiona Wilson collapsed in front of police officers. Her final act of courage, driving through her injuries to flag down help, turned into the first critical piece of evidence. The officers who reached her vehicle saw the blood soaking her clothes, the bullet wounds in her body, and the fear etched across her fading expression. Though she could not give a full statement before she passed, her presence told investigators exactly where to look. The crime scene was the modest home of Keosha Greer. By the time detectives arrived, the house was already marked with signs of violence. Shattered glass from the storm door lay scattered across the porch, the frame splintered from the force of Keiona's entry. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, every detail frozen in the aftermath of a deadly confrontation. Blood patterns revealed the path Keiona had taken as she struggled to fight, then fled toward her car. Shell casings were found near the entrance, confirming the close-range gunfire that had torn through her body. Detectives secured the scene and took Greer into custody for questioning. Her story came quickly. She claimed self-defense. She told investigators that Keiona had forced her way inside, that she had no choice but to protect herself from an enraged wife who came looking for a fight. To Greer, the shooting was a desperate act of survival. But to police, the story was far from complete. The husband, whose silence had already defined the night, was located inside the home. His presence raised more questions than answers. Why had he remained hidden during the confrontation? Why had he not stepped forward to de-escalate the situation before it turned violent? His reluctance to intervene painted him less as a bystander and more as the silent architect of the tragedy. Investigators pressed him, asking whether he had encouraged Greer to arm herself, or whether he had knowingly allowed his wife to walk into a deadly ambush. His evasive answers did little to clear his name in the eyes of the public. Witnesses from the neighborhood began to piece together the timeline. Several recalled hearing shouting outside the home. Others described the unmistakable sound of gunfire breaking the stillness of the evening. Their accounts aligned with the physical evidence. Keiona had not attacked from a distance. She had approached directly, seeking confrontation, and had paid with her life. Forensics teams reconstructed the shooting, analyzing the angle of bullets, the spread of shattered glass, and the trajectory that left Keiona fighting for her life. Their findings suggested that the first shot had indeed been fired through the storm door before Keiona even crossed the threshold. That fact alone cast doubt on the claim of immediate self-defense. As news of the crime spread, Nashville residents reacted with shock. This was not just another story of gun violence. It was a tale of betrayal, of a marriage broken from within, of a woman who fought until her final breath, and of another woman who would now be forced to explain why she chose to pull the trigger instead of walk away. For investigators, the case was clear in its tragedy but clouded in its motives. Was this truly a desperate act of protection, or was it the culmination of jealousy, fear, and rage that could no longer be contained? The trial that followed became the next stage of this tragedy, drawing the private lives of 3 people into the harsh glare of the courtroom. For the Wilson family, it was a chance to demand justice for Keiona, a woman whose only crime had been to seek answers. For Keosha Greer, it was a fight for her freedom, her defense hinging on the claim that she had acted out of fear, not malice. And for the husband, it was a reckoning. His silence and choices scrutinized not just by lawyers, but by an entire community that wanted to know why he had let the conflict reach this point. Prosecutors laid out a narrative of cold, deliberate violence. They argued that Keosha Greer had multiple options that night. She could have called the police. She could have stayed behind her locked door. She could have de-escalated with words. Instead, they said, she reached for a gun and fired, not once, but twice. The first shot, through the storm door, was portrayed as an act of aggression rather than defense. To the jury, prosecutors painted a picture of a woman protecting not her life, but her affair. The defense countered with a different story. They described Keiona as enraged, as someone who forced her way into the home. Greer, they argued, was outnumbered, cornered by a furious wife and the looming possibility of an attack. They leaned heavily on Tennessee's self-defense laws, insisting that Greer had acted within her rights when she pulled the trigger. To them, it was not murder, but survival. Testimonies brought the emotional weight of the case to the surface. Neighbors described hearing the shouting, the crash of the door, and then the gunshots. Family members of Keiona Wilson spoke of her devotion, her loyalty, and the pain of losing her so suddenly. Experts in forensics explained the trajectory of bullets, noting that the first shot was fired before Keiona had even fully entered the home. That detail became a pivotal moment in the trial. Was the trigger pulled out of fear, or was it pulled to stop her from coming any closer? Throughout the proceedings, the husband sat in quiet discomfort, his role unavoidably central. Witnesses pointed to his cowardice, his refusal to intervene, his absence in the crucial moment when he might have stopped two women from destroying one another. He was never charged with a crime, but his reputation was shredded under the weight of public anger. In many eyes, he was the man who lit the match and walked away, while the fire consumed everything. The media followed every step, turning the courtroom into a stage. Headlines emphasized betrayal, jealousy, and the deadly consequences of secrets. For the public, it became not just a trial of one woman, but a reflection of how lies and silence can unravel lives. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom sat in tense silence. The jury's decision would define how the community remembered Keosha Greer, not as a victim, but as the woman who chose to end another's life. The days following the revelation were marked by unbearable silence inside the Richardson household. Tyre barely spoke. His mother tried to reach out, but her words fell against a wall of resentment he had been building since childhood. His father, meanwhile, retreated deeper into his own world, as though the exposure of his secrets had shattered any remaining illusions of control. Tyre began staying out late, roaming the city streets until dawn. He carried with him a mixture of anger, confusion, and despair, an emotional cocktail that would soon spiral into tragedy. Each night, he returned home, his clothes reeking of alcohol and smoke, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless wandering. His friends, those who had once looked up to him as a fearless leader, started noticing a change. Tyre was no longer the confident figure they knew. He was paranoid, restless, and prone to sudden outbursts. He would pace back and forth in their presence, muttering to himself about betrayal, injustice, and the unbearable weight of being misunderstood. One evening, after another heated argument with his father, Tyre stormed out of the house with nothing but a hoodie and his phone. He wandered aimlessly until he reached an abandoned lot near the edge of the city, a place he used to visit as a teenager to escape the chaos at home. There, alone in the darkness, he sat on the cold concrete, scrolling through old photos on his phone, pictures of birthdays, family gatherings, fleeting moments of happiness. But each image now carried a bitter aftertaste, a reminder of the lies and deceptions that had poisoned his childhood. In that lonely silence, Tyre began to craft his own narrative. To him, he wasn't just a victim of circumstance, he was the embodiment of pain ignored, of truths buried, of loyalty betrayed. He convinced himself that no one truly cared about his suffering, that everyone who claimed to love him had, in some way, contributed to his downfall. The anger that had once fueled his survival now began to consume him entirely. When he returned home that night, his mother noticed the emptiness in his eyes. She tried once again to comfort him, but Tyre brushed past her, retreating to his room. For hours, he sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts racing in a loop of anger and despair. He replayed every slight, every betrayal, every moment he felt invisible. His mind became a prison, the walls closing in tighter with each passing hour. The breaking point came just days later, after another explosive argument with his father, this one more brutal than the rest. Tyre left the house in a storm of rage. This time, he didn't come back. His absence stretched into hours, then days. His friends received cryptic text messages from him, messages filled with apologies, bitterness, and hints of finality. "Y'all never understood me," one text read, "but soon you will." Those words would haunt them forever. In the wake of Tyre's final disappearance, the city seemed quieter, almost as if it too was holding its breath. News of what happened spread quickly, first through whispers among friends, then through social media posts, and finally across local headlines. Tyre Richardson was gone. The boy who had once carried the weight of his family's dysfunction and the expectations of his peers had reached a breaking point that no one could pull him back from. The tragedy was not just in his death, but in the silence that preceded it. Tyre had spent years crying out in ways few truly recognized, through his anger, through his restlessness, through his sudden outbursts. What the world saw as rebellion was, in reality, a desperate attempt to be understood. His story is not merely one of a young man's self-destruction, but of an environment that failed to nurture him when he needed it most. His mother carried the heaviest burden of grief. She replayed every conversation, every moment she could have said more, hugged him tighter, or listened longer. His father, on the other hand, retreated even further into himself, weighed down by guilt and denial. Neighbors whispered about the dysfunction in the Richardson household, but the truth was that what destroyed Tyre wasn't just his family. It was the accumulation of silence, secrecy, and unresolved pain passed down through generations. For Tyre's friends, the tragedy left scars of a different kind. They replayed his final messages, dissecting every word, wondering if they could have intervened. One friend admitted he thought Tyre was just venting when he sent those ominous texts. Another confessed she ignored his late-night call, assuming it could wait until morning. Each carried their own version of guilt, and together they formed a circle of remorse, haunted by the realization that sometimes the signs are only clear in hindsight. In reflecting on Tyre's life, the community was forced to confront uncomfortable truths. His story illuminated the dangers of neglect, not only within families, but within society at large. Too often, young people like Tyre are labeled as troubled, rebellious, or lost causes, without anyone asking why. His anger was not born in a vacuum. It was cultivated in a home fractured by secrets and dishonesty, in a world that valued appearances over authenticity, and in friendships that mistook silent cries for dramatic gestures. The conclusion to Tyre Richardson's story is not one that ties neatly into lessons learned or justice served. Instead, it lingers, like an unfinished sentence, a shadow that follows those who knew him. His life and death serve as a chilling reminder that the weight of unspoken pain can be just as destructive as any visible wound. And yet, even in tragedy, there is a call to action. Tyre's story demands that we listen more deeply to our children, our siblings, our friends, even to strangers. It reminds us that beneath anger, there is often hurt. Beneath rebellion, there is often longing. And beneath silence, there is often a scream waiting to be heard. In the end, Tyre Richardson's legacy is a mirror held up to us all. It asks us to confront the uncomfortable, the secrets we bury, the truths we ignore, the cries we dismiss. His life may have ended, but the reflection it forces upon us remains. And perhaps that is the most haunting conclusion of all, not that Tyre's story ended in tragedy, but that it could have been prevented if someone, anyone, had truly listened.